Okay, Cyberpunk 2077, Phantom Liberty plus version 2.0. This is like, I feel like Dr. Manhattan sometimes with the amount of times that an update for this game has come out and the chat has been like, no, it's different, it's much better now, everything's been fixed, and you play it and it's like, and it's the same, it's the exact same game again, but in a slightly better state. Is 2.0 actually a different game now, is the first question I've got for you, Alex.
Well, the answer's complicated. I mean, I guess what I'd say to what you just said is my opinion on it is, I was trying to explain this to someone yesterday because there was a Twitter thing where there was a particular games media person who had tweeted Cyberpunk was always good, by the way, and people were mocking that person, and I get it, and I was sort of saying, what I'd say is Cyberpunk 2077 was always good, with this great big asterisk and this great big caveat, which was it was always good as long as you could actually run it. And basically at launch it was unplayable. I would say unplayable is a fair description on console, and depending on where you're at on PC and what sort of tech you had access to, it was a sliding scale of bad up to good. And I think the core game was pretty good, and then they obviously issued a bunch of patches, which is what you're saying. It was patched so many times over that first year. But I think by the time they reached patch 1.6, it was the best version of that game. That, you know, they'd sort of reached their potential. So what 2.0 is, and Phantom Liberty, because I think you really have to take them as a package deal, 2.0 and Phantom Liberty are a reimagining of the game. And so, for instance, the RPG mechanics, this isn't just a patch, this is a different game. Like, the skill tree, completely different. The way you progress, completely different. Armor is now attached to your cyberware, whereas before it was attached to your clothes. So your clothing now is purely cosmetic. And because they've made that change, the way that cyberware works is completely different, where before you just had a bunch of slots and it was just governed by how much money you had and stuff and what equipment you could afford to put in. Now it's actually like your skill tree, one element of your skill tree gives you a higher capacity to withstand more cyberware, which then lets you go and install more stuff of a higher quality, of a higher grade, more powerful. And so this new skill tree and this new perk progression and the new cyberware, it all sort of integrates. And obviously you're playing through the same missions when you're playing the main story. And they added a few bits and bobs over the year, over the years since release, in free patches to add a few new cars and missions, stuff like that. But the RPG mechanics you're using to build that stuff is completely different. And so, I don't know, how do you judge that? Is that a new game? Yes or no? I think the interesting thing about Cyberpunk is when you step back and look at it, actually, what you realise is, at launch, they made a lot... The technical stuff wasn't as bad, to be clear. But from a gameplay design perspective, they made a lot of the same mistakes they made with The Witcher 3. And the funny thing is, if you go back to Wild Hunt and you were to go back to the day one, you get the console disc and you put that console disc in a console and not down on an offline basis. It is very much almost in many systems unrecognizable to the game that people actually now talk about being as one of the greatest of all time.
That's true.
And I think the difference between Cyberpunk and The Witcher is, with The Witcher they got away with it. With Cyberpunk, the hype levels were so high, and that combined with the last gen version, which probably shouldn't have released at all, to mean that everybody noticed. It became a lightning rod for these issues, and they didn't pass under the radar like they did with The Witcher. But yeah, so I do think, and then Phantom Liberty is just a lot like with The Witcher expansions, with Heart of Stone and Blood and Wine. It's just developers in full control, in beautiful full control of their of all their faculties and all their skills, and they know exactly how to get the most out of the engine and the game they've built and the mechanics they have. And so it's just a masterclass in fucking amazing quest design. Like bang, 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 bang. Everything is a hit. It's like greatest hits of the rest of the game. And I think there's some pretty good quest design in the rest of the game. But I think what stands out in Phantom Liberty is, in the main game, it's sort of the main quests that stand out. And obviously the nice thing about Cyberpunk is there's sort of several different threads of main quests. There's like the Judy stuff with the Mox, and there's the stuff with the Aldecados, and there's the stuff with Arasaka, and so there were multiple threads of those really good missions. But the difference I would say in Phantom Liberty is even the side quests, the gigs, so that's the blue icons that aren't technically side quests. They're just like, the story setup is a phone call at the start, a phone call at the end, and maybe you'll find some emails or something during the mission. Even they are like next level in Phantom Liberty. So I do think, I think it's a transformed game. I genuinely do believe that, and I think if this game had launched in this state, it would be regarded as, a Game of the Year contender, and people would be talking about it as one of the best games of all time. I actually saw, I think it was Jason Schreier who tweeted this morning, and I thought it was quite a funny, astute observation, saying, what do Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 have in common? They were both in early access for 3 years. And I sort of see it. It's the funny thing. It's like, if Cyberpunk had been in early access and this week was the official release, it would have had a Metascore of like 97.
Yeah. That's a mad way of looking at it. It's a really good way of looking at it, but obviously you got to take into account that like it wasn't in fact early access, and
you can't give them a free pass. They took money off a lot of people, and it was fucked. But I think the thing to say, in fairness, they have done well and done right. They've fixed it. They haven't just like papered over the cracks as a lot of developers have done. I think the comparison to like a No Man's Sky is fair, except this is a way more dense game with way more going on than that game. Obviously, people want to make the Final Fantasy XIV comparison. I think that's a little bit different, because that was a game where really what they did was they didn't rescue the existing game. They literally built a new game and then replaced the broken game. So it's a slightly different calculus, and almost more impressive in a sense, because that required huge outlay from Square Enix, more than they've spent on Cyberpunk. But it's clear to me that they've done the right thing, and if you bought Cyberpunk on last gen, you can you can play the 1.6 patch, and that's fine. If you bought it on PC or current gen, you've now got the upgrade to this version, and it's just a much more complete experience. So yeah,
I love that. And is it worth? Because I never finished Cyberpunk. I think I probably got about halfway through the main quest, and I think it was like my second restart. Is it worth just scrapping all that and going back, doing a fresh save, and playing it with Phantom Liberty all as one thing?
So the way Phantom Liberty works is a lot like The Witcher, the same as The Witcher DLCs, indeed. But basically, they will give you an option in the menu that you can press that, and it will skip you to the point in the story of Cyberpunk 2077 with default choices made, the point in the story where Phantom Liberty starts. So you can do that, which is exactly how they handled it in The Witcher. And Phantom Liberty is a fine standalone adventure. Spy thriller, sort of wraps up on its own terms. However, depending on the choices you make and stuff, there can be repercussions from Phantom Liberty that echo back into the main game, and there's actually new endings to the core Cyberpunk story that you can get through Phantom Liberty. So I actually started again, and I'm quite pleased I did, because I just think all the 2.0 changes as well. I hadn't played it in a very long time, since launch basically. So there was like Edge Runners content based on the anime, and some new missions and new cars and stuff like that, and so that all sort of blended together with all the Phantom Liberty stuff. And one thing I really like is that quite often you get DLC for these open world games, and they either are just something that takes place in the existing open world, or they are a new discrete area. It's sort of like how Toussaint in Witcher, right? It was a separate map that you teleported to. Dogtown, the setting of Phantom Liberty, is in Night City. It's an area of Night City you couldn't previously access. But now the DLC's there, you can go through the checkpoint and enter Dogtown at any point seamlessly, no loads. And even the mission structure of Phantom Liberty, the missions that start in Dogtown cross back over into the main city and things like that. So you'll find yourself crisscrossing back in and out. And I like that you can be doing the Phantom Liberty plot line and get a phone call off one of your friends from the main storyline where they say they want to hang out or they say they need your help, and you can hop in a car and drive back to the city proper and carry on that. You can they've even gone back and like, so the closest companion characters that you get close to, people like Judy, they've even gone back and got those guys back in the studio. And even though those guys don't play a role in Phantom Liberty itself necessarily, they've gone back so that if you phone them for a chat, one of the features of the main game is you can talk about things that you've recently done. And so they've gone back and recorded conversations with those guys about the Phantom Liberty list missions.
That's really cool.
So you can call someone from the main game and say, I've just met the president. I've just done this. I've just done that. So yeah, I really like how it integrates.
That's awesome. Yeah.
The only thing I'd say is the new endings, for my money, an interesting thing that happens with your save game, I guess, is if you fulfill the requirements to get the new endings, that can happen in such a way where it takes some pieces off the table, which sort of can remove some of the other endings. So I actually think the optimum way to play it is to play Cyberpunk with Phantom Liberty, but don't play Phantom Liberty to the end. Perhaps go and see the main endings, because Cyberpunk, it's not like Mass Effect, it branches quite nicely at the end. Like, if you have access to everything, which as I did the first time I finished that game, you could literally create a save, make one choice, do the last mission, see the ending, reload, make another choice, do the different last mission, because that's the other thing that's quite cool, is the last missions differ quite significantly depending on what you're doing.
Right, okay.
So I would do that and then go and finish the Phantom Liberty, do the last bit of the Phantom Liberty content, and then go and do the ending one more time if you want to see everything. And I actually think Cyberpunk's one of those really cool games in the sense that, unlike a BioWare game or whatever, not that there's anything wrong with a BioWare game, but but unlike those sorts of games, there is really no optimum best choice for an ending. A bit of a theme in Cyberpunk as a whole is that there is no good decision and there is no good ending for absolutely everyone and everything, and you have to make some choices, which actually makes going back and seeing the other endings really interesting, as opposed to sort of the Mass Effect thing of, well, the Mass Effect 2 thing, let's say, of, well, I want to do the suicide mission, I want everyone to survive, and that's it.
Yeah. Or just the usual sort of like, I was either a bad guy or a good guy.
Yeah, exactly. So but I definitely think it's worth replaying, and I actually think, like, of the games this year, if you're talking offline single player experiences, for me, this is up there with Baldur's Gate and with Tears of the Kingdom this year. Definitely above Starfield.
Really?
So,
wow, okay.
Yeah.
Poor Starfield.
it's a good game, but it's just, it's just not as good as this.
I mean, the thing is, it's unfortunately, it's been outclassed by a lot of stuff round about it. But I'm still enjoying Starfield, but that's by the by. But I'm really excited about restarting Cyberpunk again. On a technical level, you've been playing on PC, right? You've got a massive Tory nonsense box, and are you playing it like on max settings? Have you got path tracing on, or?
I am playing it genuinely with absolutely everything maxed out, but you have to keep in mind that I've got an i9 3900K, so that's pretty much the most powerful new Intel processor on the market. I've got a 4090 and I've got 64 gig of RAM, so I can sort of do what I want. But it's actually really interesting, because if you've got a 40 series card, or even to a lesser extent a 30 series card, really high IQ image quality is really achievable on this. So I will say, before we get into this aspect, so like housekeeping, I'm obviously going to send you a bunch of footage after we've recorded this. So there's some B-roll from a CD Projekt, which is pretty noticeable, I think, because it actually says what the settings are on the top of the screen. And then I've sent you some footage of mine that are to my settings. My settings are basically the default RT overdrive settings, which is basically everything max, except that I've set the the image quality setting defaults to auto, and I put that to visuals rather than performance, which what I noticed was when it was on auto, the image quality would be slightly less good, but I'd get like 120 frames a second. This is with DLSS and stuff. On auto, I was getting, it was obviously prioritizing the performance a little bit more. And so with the DLSS and stuff, I was getting around 120 frames a second. If I dropped that off auto and dropped it to another, dropped it to the visual fidelity setting, I was getting maybe 80 to 90 FPS. So I was losing 30, 40 FPS, but still well in excess of 60, which who cares? The big thing really this time for 2.0 is on PC is Nvidia's been a big partner with CD Projekt on Cyberpunk right since launch, and Cyberpunk's been a big ray tracing showcase, and they've got a new thing called ray reconstruction. So okay, what is this? So the other housekeeping thing I'll say is I'm a tech nerd, but I'm not like the deep dive. I'm going to give you a much higher level qualitative discussion about this. If you really want to get into the nitty gritty, Digital Foundry's got some pretty good videos where they actually did some partnership videos with Nvidia and with CD Projekt, and also Gamers Nexus. Steve over there is always excellent and really is probably just the most concise. You might get boggled and lost a little bit in some of the terminology, but he delivers it in a way where it's manageable. So with that said, so what is ray reconstruction? So it sounds like a character in a Lego cartoon, but basically it's an extension of DLSS. And DLSS, what is DLSS? DLSS is deep learning super sampling. That is basically AI technology that is used to fill the missing data in images in more detail. Why would there be missing data? Well, the concept is the higher fidelity, the higher settings you run a game at, the more of a hit it is on the game's performance. But obviously you can balance that with running the game at a lower resolution. So if you want to run a game with ray tracing and stuff and you want to run it at native 4K, let's say that game at 4K only runs at 15 FPS with the ray tracing cranked up. But if you cut that down to 1440, maybe it goes to 30. And if you crank that down to 1080, maybe it goes to 40, 45. And if you crank that all the way down to 720p, maybe that goes all the way back up to 60. So the idea is you render the game at lower resolution, and then the AI does the work frame by frame to fill in the missing detail to give you an image that, once it hits your screen, is next to unrecognizable compared to a native 4K image.
It's comparable. Like it's and
I
think for
close.
Most people it's close enough. And
I think it's one of those things. Actually, it's closer in motion as well. But then you have sort of, when you have comparisons where you pause it or you freeze frame it, you take a screenshot and you go, oh, there's some ghost in there, which is the thing. So it's not a perfect technology, and ray tracing in particular. Ray tracing effects are really noisy and generate visual noise, because running these at a high level where you trace all the rays would cripple, would just destroy, most graphics cards. It's just not viable. So you can only fire a certain number of rays. And so the way that would work is they'd use a denoiser to fill in the missing detail there. But sometimes the denoiser would misunderstand the scene, which would result in things like weird shadows, shimmering. The example that Nvidia's pushed, and Gamers Nexus has a whole section where they examine this, is say you're in a car and you're zipping along really, really fast. You would see ghosting of the wing mirror because the AI that's sort of doing the upscale and doing the denoising and all that stuff can't quite figure out the movement. So you end up with this slight fading shadow of your wing mirror. Basically, ray reconstruction is all around the ray tracing. It doesn't fundamentally change the DLSS thing, but it's like an add-on. The idea is it replaces the denoiser entirely. So that denoiser doesn't necessarily understand how fast something's moving, so you get a blurrier presentation in place, especially with fast movement. Ray reconstruction brings AI machine learning in to fill that missing data in the same way as DLSS, basically. So instead of so before it was ray trace, denoise, DLSS. Now it's ray trace, ray reconstruction, DLSS. And it's the AI aspect that intelligently predicts and outputs frames with a more accurate, realistic lighting setup. So that has a lot of things. You get you have the stuff like the wing mirror effects that I noted earlier is less common, but it's still there a little bit. The thing I noticed is if you're driving at night, especially if it's wet, as you drive quickly, the sort of rear red lights of the car, you don't get a perfect reflection of those as you move along. It's a bit of a smear behind you, again, because of the fast movement.
Yeah.
But, you know, also puddles have like way more definition. There's way less shimmer. Often if you stood still in front of reflective surfaces with the previous iteration of DLSS and with the denoiser, because it was denoising every individual frame, you get a shimmering effect. Because the denoiser would have an ever so slightly different effect each time, ever so slightly different outcome for each individual frame. So you'd have a weird shimmering. Portal RTX is a really good place to see that, where there's lots of metallic structures in, lots of metallic surfaces in aperture science, so you can stand in front of something and see that.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing, if not impossible, to get across in a video with YouTube compression.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, which again is why I encourage you to sort of go to places like Gamers Nexus or Digital Foundry, because they will get way more in, and they'll be freeze framing and zooming in and really getting into the nitty gritty. So, but where does it stand? I mean, basically, I think it is better. It's got its pros, it's got its cons. I think if you go and watch some of the other channels I talked about, you'll hear them talk a little bit about that. Ray reconstruction is better at some things, worse at others. But it is the first generation of this technology, and looking at how far DLSS has come in, like,
which is ridiculous,
3 years, 4 years is crazy. And so I think as a first pass, Ray reconstruction seems to be incredible.
It
is absolutely
mad.
the way to play the game as well. It's absolutely the way to play the game. DLSS is reconstructing the image from a lower resolution image to make it appear 4K, so from 1080p up to 4K. And ray reconstruction is taking a small number of rays and having the visual output that is the same as if you were tracing a large number of rays. The only thing that can really do, as long as you've got a compatible card, is induce lag. But these technologies are also combined, and actually, if you turn on ray reconstruction, it's mandatory, are also combined with NVIDIA Reflex. And Reflex is basically a lag reduction technology that is astonishingly good. I've written about it on the website. It's not just the DLSS ray tracing thing. Like, this is something you can use with, like, Overwatch online to give yourself an edge. When you've got all that on, I don't think you really notice lag. And I've been playing, obviously, Cyberpunk is an FPS RPG anyway. Aiming isn't necessarily the biggest thing in the world. Indeed, you can get smart weapons that aim for you with the right perks. But I've been playing like a traditional shooter, and I haven't had, with a keyboard and mouse, without the smart weapons, and I haven't really noticed any. But we've come such a long way from, like, you know, if you turn ray tracing on in Battlefield 1, which was one of the first ray tracing games that NVIDIA really pushed, it was something where to play on, the sell that NVIDIA made was, this is amazing because if you're playing online and someone's sneaking up behind you, you'll actually see their live reflection in the mirror and can turn around and have them, or see their reflection in a car door, like a shiny surface on the street. But the reality was, you turned DLSS on, you turned ray tracing on, and at that point there was no DLSS in that game, so you turned ray tracing on and it tanked your frame rate from 60 down to 40, and that puts you at a disadvantage online anyway. We're now at a place where Cyberpunk's a single player game, but we're now at a place where you've got, you know, you can see in excess of 100 FPS with these settings. Now, this isn't raw rasterization, so it's not a native image you're seeing on your screen, but in my opinion, if it looks that much better in terms of the visual effects and stuff like that, crazy lighting, crazy puddles, Cyberpunk looks really good with all the neon and stuff. I actually think it also looks really good out in the desert with the daylight and things. If it looks amazing, then I don't really care. There are some people who are native image purists, I think, which is fair enough. I understand, who are native image purists and say, well, I'm not interested unless the image I'm looking at is real, so to speak. And is something that's being directly outputted from your graphics card direct to your screen. But I actually don't think that's the future.
No, I don't think that's the future at all.
Already, if this technology becomes ubiquitous, I look at Cyberpunk 2.0 with all this stuff on, and these are things that the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series cannot accomplish. Even the PlayStation 5 Pro won't be able to accomplish it unless they put in a similar solution. But the issue is they're on AMD chips, and AMD are, in my opinion, a bit behind in this space.
Yeah.
Both ray
oh
tracing
well,
and...
totally. Yeah, they're constantly playing catch up, and they're constantly like, you know.
FSR is getting there, so FSR is their DLSS equivalent.
It's still nowhere near as intelligent, though, is it? It's
no,
it's much
but the
more
big
of a kind of
difference
brute
there
force.
is, in fairness to AMD, and this is why it's quite an interesting time in the market, is AMD FSR is much more plug and play.
Mm-hmm.
You can sort of just have FSR included in games with next to no impact. It's sort of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other.
Yeah.
But definitely NVIDIA are getting the better end of the deal in terms of the technology they have.
I do think the future of real-time graphics is pretty much this, where what comes out of the frame buffer is more of a guideline for like all the reconstructive technology.
And of course, Switch, right?
Yeah.
That's what this is about. Well, it's not what this is about, but that's where this leads.
Yeah, you end up with Switch 2.0 being able to have like ray tracing turned on everything and stuff like that.
Yeah, because it's on an NVIDIA chip.
Yeah.
And so I imagine DLSS and ray tracing will be a huge component of that, right?
We know that the next generation of consoles after this one, I mean, all bets are off in terms of what silicon they're on. We have no idea. They could all be on ARM chips for all we know. Is it possible that because of the stuff that NVIDIA is doing, is it possible that the consoles are going to pivot to NVIDIA because the tools on offer are just that much better, that much more advanced, that much more seasoned by this point? It depends how well AMD play catch up. But it's a really exciting time because for years and years and years, real-time ray tracing was like a bit of a holy grail for computer graphics, and it was always said to be basically unachievable because you need so much grunt to be able to do it to any kind of playable standard. And now, because of all the kind of smoke and mirrors we can get with these reconstructive technologies, it's viable. So it's really exciting. However, I'm going to be playing Phantom Liberty on PS5. So
I'm curious how you'll get on, because clearly the game is working. Like it's out as we record this, and I'm not seeing people shitting themselves on social. So I'm guessing it's working on console, but I am curious to see how it runs on. In fact, I plan to play a bit on Xbox Series S this weekend, just as a sort of
that old chestnut. Yeah.
Well, I love the Series S, to be fair.
Yeah. And I thought the 1.6 version of Cyberpunk ran really well on Series S. In fact, I think, considering that Series S is like, 250 quid or whatever, I've made this point in the past, but it's like, you cannot play Cyberpunk on like for 200. You cannot play it for that amount of money anywhere else unless you're doing it like over cloud or whatever. So it's insane that it runs as well as it does. So yeah, there's lots to be excited about. But I just really like consoles. So
that's fair. I think there's nothing wrong with that.
I've tried. I do have the PC version of Cyberpunk on GOG, and you know what? I love how it looked. I was able to like run it with ray tracing and everything. I've got a 3080 Ti on here, which still isn't a bad card by any means. And it looks great, but like fucking PC gaming, innit? Can't be bothered with it. So it's very much like a canary in the coal mine for what's going to come next. So just to recap, it looks amazing. It plays very well, and it is in fact mechanically on a system level, it is now a different game to what it started out as.
It's completely different. It's completely different, but the same. Same thing, but different, but still same. As that meme goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's. I'm loving it. It is a game of the year contender for me. It would be in my top 5 this. In fact, it will be in my top 5 this year, because I do. Even though I finished it, I regard it as sort of a new experience. In Phantom Liberty, we didn't talk massively about it, but this video is getting long anyway. But just rest assured, Phantom Liberty is one of the best expansions ever made if not the best. But the only reason I couch that is because there's a lot of Golden Age expansions. You know, at that point we're competing with some of the old Command and Conquer expansions, and maybe even some Warcraft expansions, things like that, which I think of in a different sort of category.
Is it better than Shivering Isles?
That's a really interesting question, because I haven't played Shivering Isles since 2008 or whenever it came out. But I'm going to go ahead and say I think it probably is. Because there's a lot new to this, whereas I don't really remember, other than being like, oh, there's a lot of mushrooms.
Yeah.
I don't really remember much about Shivering Isles, and I feel like I felt like it was just more Oblivion, whereas this does feel, don't get me right, it is more Cyberpunk, but they've gone out of their way to sort of do some quite different things, and it combines, like I say, beautifully with the 2.0 stuff. So like the 2.0 update adds car combat, where you can literally you can fire your gun from cars, but you can also literally strap mounted weapons to vehicles, missile launchers, you know, drive around like you've got a James Bond car with machine guns on the front, whatever. So that's added in 2.0. So even if you don't own Phantom Liberty, you have that in Night City. But then there's a bunch of missions and stuff in Phantom Liberty that obviously make use of that and leverage that. And that's what I mean about it's cool how these things have sort of locked together.